Bom, bom dia a todas e todos. A gente queria primeiro agradecer a presença de vocês nesse sábado de manhã de carnaval. Esse workshop com os livros do Parasite, ele foi possível porque eles estão aqui devido a uma bolsa concedida pela plataforma Forecast, que, se eu não me engano, é holandesa.
Não, é
alemã. E como outras vezes, ano passado, a gente toma proveito dessa situação em que vem escritórios de fora e propõe uma atividade, mas dessa vez é a primeira oportunidade que a gente está fazendo um workshop, então espero que dê tudo certo. Bom, os dois, a Luca e o Stefano, falta ainda o Eugênio, e são 3 no total, eles são sediados em Milão, em Bruxelas, e eles têm um trabalho bastante relevante em relação à cenografia, design, arquitetura, de exposição. E, bom, mas...
Não, o Eugênio não vem porque ele está fazendo um trabalho em Madrid, uma instalação que estamos desenvolvendo com os outros alunos da Escola de Madrid. Não sei, a gente já tinha mandado algumas apresentações, acho que fica à vontade para perguntar, mas eles vão fazer uma pequena introdução sobre arquitetura e literatura, arquitetura e romance, porque a gente vai, como a gente disse, a partir desse livro, fazer um exercício formal de pensar espaço, nas volumetrias, e acho que deixa a palavra para eles, né?
Eu não sei se vai ter muito tempo para sei lá, ter perguntas no fim, mas acho que fiquei à vontade.
Acho que tem o dia todo, né? A ideia, só para explicar o cronograma, eles vão fazer essa apresentação, vocês vão poder intervir, perguntar, entender melhor. Aí antes do almoço a gente vai sentar, a gente vai se dividir em 4 grupos, entre aspas, só para ficar 3 para cada um, a gente meio dando uma mão, assim, mas a gente vai ficar naquela mesona todo mundo junto. E a ideia é cada um fazer o seu objetinho, e aí a gente almoça, volta, mão na massa, e no fim da tarde dá uma organizada e montar essa exposição. A gente já começou a montar ela ontem, é uma coisa improvisada, mas acho que vai ficar legal, vocês vão poder opinar também, mudar, acho que também pensar qual peça fica em qual lugar. A gente também pode pensar em sortear ou escolher os trechos que já foram selecionados. Acho que a gente vê isso depois, né?
We will explain a bit more.
É isso então.
Grazie.
Grazie. So, hi. I'm Stefano, and together with
Luca and Stefano.
I'm Luca.
Who is which?
And
That's it.
Together with Eugenio. So, as Luis said, we are Parasite 2.0, like a young design practice that was born right now, like 10 years ago, during the years of the university in Milano. And so we are based between like Brussels and Milano. Our main core, let's say, projects are like around scenography, exhibition design, and even like, some relationship with like the artwork itself, so like with art galleries or like festivals. Sometimes we just express, like our research through like installations and like working on the space itself. Sometimes we also use like a mix of different media, so like from performing art to visual art. And so it's a pleasure to be here, thank you, thank you, Luis, Gabriel, Escola da Cidade. So as they said, we are here because like the workshop is part of this work state, which is these 2 weeks we had the possibility to travel around like Brazil through like Rio and Sao Paulo and he's part of this project called Nasty Temple. It's like a sort of temporary theater, a collaboration between different collectives we are inviting to perform in Berlin in April. And it's part of this forecast, which is a program, a German program on like the mentorship, between different arts and different practices. Actually, there is an open call still going on till the 4th of March. Yeah, and so it's a really interesting program because you have the possibility to be selected and to work for like almost a year with a mentor and with like consistent fundings, and so you have also the possibility to travel and like you have a stipend fee and you have a production budget. Yeah, and so the work like is called Nasty Temple and is about like thinking how can we imagine different way of living collective life in the future. It's not something like futuristic in the sense of like utopian, like science fiction. Like it's quite like concrete, like very simple, like nothing, not so much like intellectual masturbation. And so like the idea is to invite like 3 collectives from like around Europe and Brazil to in a way express and show their vision about like how can we collectively like live in the future. And so what we thought, like our idea was to use like the idea of the theater, to stage like this story or idea. Yeah. And so we consider like the workshop also part of this like research. It's like the second act of this project, because in a way like what we are going to do today, it's like starting from one of the most famous utopian book. I will explain a bit more. I will show also some pictures. And so we will start from this book and this vision of like a possible city, and starting from some like parts of the book, like we are going to work on this series of like clay model that we can shape like, let's say, individually but at the same time all together today. It's something really fast, like improvised, let's say. So like we have this short time, like to get all together. Yeah. So like this presentation is a small introduction and is a connection between like some books and like some of our projects. And well, it's called architecture novels because actually these books are in a way, like stories, but based very well and with like deep roots into like architectural vision. So like there is a strong connection, like an overlapping between the story, like this narration, and like these tales, and like the city where this story happened. Okay. So like So the first book is Utopia, and it's actually like a really famous book. It's the first archi novel we selected. Like we're gonna see 3 different books, and so like Utopia, like actually is like the book from where this world was born. So like it's a sort of, let's say, socio-political fiction. Written by Thomas More in Latin and was published in 1516. And well, so like the book, let's say, is a sort of like narrative frame, and primarily like describe this sort of like fictional island and the society and its religious, like and like the social and also political customs of the people living this island. Now, what is really interesting is that like there is a strong description of this island, even like a map with the cities of this island, even like an alphabet, So like there is a strong connection between like this vision of form of society, and the place itself. And well, let's say, long story short, it's a sort of like ideal society, a sort of like proto-socialist society, let's say. In which way, like it's based on like shared goods, you know. So it was a really important book for like the European radical thinking, like during the 16th century, right? And like for example, like there wasn't private property, like, and all the goods were like stored in like common buildings and shared between like all the citizens. And there wasn't any form of like hierarchies. So it was also sort of like first, like, let's say, anarchist vision of society. So like we connected like this book with this topic, which is stigmergy. So what's stigmergy? Like how can we connect this vision of utopia to like architectural design? No? So like stigmergy is a process that like social insects like ants, bees, termites use to build their architectures, right? Their own nest. So like the process is not like there isn't any project behind. You know, they just like move, you know, with the use of pheromones, you know. And so like it's like really an architecture that takes shapes in a really collective way. You know, like it's the opposite of the project of how we define, you know, like project in architecture still today. So like starting from this, well, this is for example like some like drawings of like termites nest. So why it's interesting for us? Because like in our research, like we have always tried to avoid, you know, this like hierarchy of like the architect on top of the process, right? And so like this is for example one of our last work is like the exhibition design. It's a scenography for this exhibition Triennale in Milano about Giancarlo De Carlo. So Giancarlo De Carlo like is an architect famous for the concept of participation. You know, so he kind of like dedicated his entire life, you know, with his like anarchist political background to like developing this like concept. So like how can we avoid, you know, like all these vertical structures like in the urban design? And so like through like books and projects, he was also part of like Team 10, which was like this visionary group like in Europe made of like different architects like Aldo Van Eyck, the Smithsons, like Bakema, Constant, right? And so like when they invited us to design this exhibition, the exhibition was actually about not like his political vision, but was about like these personal diaries. So like it's called like the Giancarlo De Carlo's notebook. So like there is like this huge shelf that display like these books, which in a way give us, you know, like an insight, you know, into his own personality. So it's like a lot about like individuality and not about, you know, like this collective vision. So we decided to reproduce one of his projects, one of the only like house he realized, like this villa for a philosopher, like in the countryside in Tuscany, and which is actually a project that he didn't like, because it was the opposite of this vision, you know, because like was like the house for like a single man, like a rich, like wealthy bourgeois man. So like, but in a way for us was like interesting the idea of like, I mean, you're gonna read these diaries, like this notebook, like, so it's something really like intimate, personal. So like, can we reproduce a sort of like intimate, you know, like environment? But what's the thing that like actually like there is like we also try to like break this rule, and so like like this living room is composed of these pieces that like actually you can move around the exhibition. So like there is like, you know, the project of this architect who defined like this cozy place, you know, like for you. And after there is like also the contradiction of like, you know, this stigmergy. So like how can you interact and in a way like create your own space? So like during the exhibition there are going to be also some like public events, you know, like talks and like, well, there is a program of events and they're going to like decompose like this living room and use like the different pieces, like for example like making like a space for like the audience of like a speech or whatever. Yeah, here's some more picture. It's homemade with like EPS, which is like polystyrene. So like it's not heavy, absolutely not. And after like it's covered with like a resin that makes it way more strong. Yeah, strong. Well, here's some more pictures. And well, after there is like this huge mirror floor, which was in a way for us like an attempt to create this like dreamy atmosphere, you know. So like during the day there is also like a lighting sort of games. So like every hour there is a performer going on top of this podium and taking like this megaphone. Yeah. Megaphone. Probably yes. No, and yeah, so there, and like the megaphone has also like, let's say, reminds us also about like urban protest, you know, like activism in a way. And so like every hour, like they turn off the light, you know, all the lights are like way more dramatic, you know, and they read like one of these, like an extract from like this diaries.
And another time there's this contradiction between the private of the quotes of the diary and the act, performative act that become really public. Really, it's kind of protest, but quoting are really personal things. Well, this exhibition works through these two different levels.
Yeah, yeah. So another project like about like utopian stigmergy is this temporary lover. And Temporary Lover was like a solo show we did in Bolzano, like a city, Bozen, in South Tyrol, and like in the north region next to the Alps. Yeah, and yeah, it was an exhibition about like why temporary lovers. So like we thought, how can we define, you know, like a place, like can we look at a place where like adults today gather together, you know, where they gather, like, and they can spend, you know, like sometimes together, and sometimes like losing all like the system of rules we usually have, you know, like in our world. So like it was like the exhibition was about like club culture, you know, like in the idea of the dance floor. So the dance floor has this place where we can all be temporary lovers somehow. You know, where you lose any form of like restriction, you know, where you like dance and sweat next to each other, something that usually like you never do, you know, like also like this contact, like it's a quite intimate space. So like the exhibition was like the two phases show. The first one was this sort of like silent club, so with like an abstraction, you know, like of elements from like the dance floor. So like the sound system, the DJ booth, like the soft chill area. Yeah, and starting from this, like, you know, we designed this series of elements, like, and there was like for 1 month the exhibition was completely silent, you know, like so it was like a sleepy space. And so after 1 month, we organized this 24-hour workshop with like students from the art academy of the city, and it was actually like a 24-hour party. So just we invited them to party with us inside the space and to use these elements of the space as like the hardware, let's say, for this party. Yeah, like the technical equipment. And so like the process was like decomposition. They also had like some tools and materials to use. So what we said was like, how can we in a way, you know, impress these energies and like sensation of like these 24-hour parties like on this exhibition. Can we leave some like traces? So like this was these are some pictures. So there were like these hoodies that they transformed like with colors and like with a really like fast do-it-yourself, like freestyle process. And well, after they interacted also with the elements, so the exhibition was completely like decomposed. Like these, for example, are like some parts of the sound system of this one. Like also like this part was completely like decomposed. The floor, like the carpet on the floor, was like cut, with some like cut out and like some different shapes all around the space. Yeah, in a way, like for us, this was, let's say, a sort of like still merging process, you know, like without having. Just so like the base, like the pheromones in that case were like just some tools, because they had like just like some colors or like some kind of tools, you know, like in order to modify. Yeah. So in a certain way, it's also like a process for us where we, you know, like kind of question also authorship. You know, like who is like after the second phase, after this 24 hours like workshop, like who is the artist, you know, behind this exhibition, like who made it? Like it's a process, like it's a collective process, right? And so after there was like this 1 month of this second phase of the exhibition with just these elements displayed. It's also difficult, like in the relationship with like a curator, you know, who is not able to understand, like, I mean, what are we gonna do with this exhibition? Like, what I'm gonna have inside the gallery, like, for 1 month if I don't know, like, exactly, like, you know,
And our answer is we don't know, because during the workshop it can happen everything at the end. But okay, perfect. This is a sort of not controlled but organized process.
Yeah.
Keeping a lot of point by freedom, for example, tools, but in the end it's kind of collective work in general on some pieces. And if, as you can see, you see that completely the space was changed. Also, I know the ceiling, the floor, they work with all this continuity of the space. And on these elements.
Yeah, and so like, well, let's go to the second book. Yeah, like the second book is Island in the Net. Well, it's a masterpiece of science fiction novel. It's from 1987 and was written by Bruce Sterling, which is like the inventor of cyberpunk. Like together with the Neuromance of Gibson, like it's considered like the first like cyberpunk book. So why it's interesting? Because it's a sort of vision of like the 21st century world in this like apparently like peaceful sort of like delocalized networking corporation. So like we don't have any more governments. Like it's very close to our contemporary world. Now we have like this huge corporation controlling the world. Like, well, think about like this, like Facebook or Google. Like, I mean, something really close. So like the book is interesting because like it's based once again on like a really detailed like description of the cities and the environments of the book itself. So like the protagonist, like it's sort of like swept up, you know, in like these events, like beyond her control. So, and she moves between this like data heaven, sort of, in like some in like real city, like Singapore, or like fictional places like Grenada or like Jamaican Highlands, you know. And what is really like shocking about the book is that like Bruce Sterling predicted the internet. So the book was based on this is based on this net, you know, and all these like sort of like pirate islands behind this net. So the net is actually like a communication system, you know, like, but it's also sort of like a monumento continuo of Super Studio, you know, so you have like this artificial, you know, like layer on top of like our like natural layer, right? So like the topic associated to the book, it's artificial nature, and it's a really important topic for us. And well, how can we define it, like somehow? And well, it's interesting to refer to this rock, which is called plastigomerate. And so, like, what is like plastigomerate? So, like, the term was proposed by Charles J. Moore, like a scientist, like who found like this stone. Well, this is not exactly like the stone he found, but like it's a similar one. And so like the stone was made by like a mix of different debris, but even like natural stone. So like was like plastic, you know, like in some elements that in a way took part, you know, to like a natural process, like a sedimentary process. So like in a way, starting from this, like in the last year, we have been working a lot on this topic. So like on the clash between like different materials, like natural materials or like artificial materials. So like, and in a way, like if we consider like the Anthropocene, like the new geological era of the human impact, you know, like the definition poses us in front, you know, of like the necessity to redefine how we see nature. So like actually like following like Paul Crutzen, the scientist who defined like this term Anthropocene, like we cannot anymore talk about like nature. You know, we can just talk about like a sort of like artificial nature. So like there isn't anymore like this idyllic like idea of nature. You know, so like there exists just like this mix like due to the like human impact. And so like, well, this is one work in that direction, and it's a scenography for a fashion show in Milano during like the fashion week. And well, the starting point was this like space that was proposed to us from this fashion brand. It's the archive of an architecture office. And well, once we saw the place, we were quite shocked about like this use of marble, you know, like in this floor. I mean, it's an archive. It's not like a living room, you know, like. And also like about how, in a way, we use, you know, like these natural stones. So like we make them like shiny, glossy, you know, like just perfectly like shaped. The opposite of like how, you know, these rocks are like in a natural state, you know. Yeah, and so like the first idea was, well, the second topic was like that, like this fashion show usually lasts 30 minutes, and they use like they spend a lot of like money, like they invest a lot of like, it's like a waste of resources, you know. So like, and they're like ready to pay like everything, every sort of materials to build like, I mean, even like a castle, like a huge structure just for these 24 minutes. So like starting from these like 2 points, like, so how can we in a way, you know, like highlight, you know, like this use of the material, and like in another way also do like a really simple like intervention that like it is not like a huge waste of resources. So like the main idea was like to cover with this like transparent plastic film like the floor, in order to create like this sort of like background, you know, for like this like showcase of clothes. And that was also a way to show like how artificial it's our way of using, you know, like these natural materials. And yeah, so like the public was able to see, like the models just from the top of the space. So there was like this sort of like green screen, like underneath. And after we just like use these ladders that are usually used inside like the archive space, like to get the materials and just to paint them like with this like simple green. Yeah, also like instead of having like the classic fashion show, like the catwalk, so like the models walk like in the end, like back and forth and that's it. Like the scenography was way more like something for like performative act. So they were playing with these elements, moving them around, getting closer like to the public on top or like going up or like downstairs and so on. Yeah. Well, the second work connected to like highlands in the net and artificial nature is this like booth we designed for an art fair, for a gallery called Damien and the Love Guru, a gallery from Brussels, and was a display for this artist called Sharon van Overmeiren. When we went through like her work, there was like this like sort of like strange aesthetic, like these elements kind of coming from like tribes of like the rainforest, like with lots of like symbols, also sort of like violence on the use like of like the human body shapes mixed with like sort of like wild nature. So like the idea behind was like, okay, let's work on this sort of like tropical rainforest. Let's transform the booth in a sort of like tropical rainforest. After like in a process of exchange with her, of course we went through like a strong like simplification. Yeah, like of these. So like she said like, well, why like actually like we can even like make this like wide space like rational, so like create this like sort of grid, that at the same time is a sort of landscape for me. So like starting from this grid, like she was able to extrude some part of this grid like to create this like series of like display structures, like podiums, shelves. Yeah.
It become like sort of archaeological museum. I mean, with another interpretation of the concept, but in general, all the support reminds this idea. You need to imagine that in our fair, the concept of booth we really love because it's kind of scenography where inside can happen everything you want at the end because all the booths are the same and you can create different at the end scenography, different words. Usually they keep white and hang painting and stuff.
Yeah, so you have this this series of boxes, white boxes, one next to each other.
And so when she proposed to us to raise a booth, we say, okay, perfect. We can create a scenography, a total scenography inside this small space, and this for us was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, so one more book. And after we can start like to work together. Yeah, well, here's some more pictures. So there was this like series of, the grid was like a sort of tile, with this like tiny detail, like in the corner. It's made of MDF, colored MDF. Yeah, there is like a company which makes like this already colored MDF. Yeah,
there's blue.
Comes in different colors.
Right.
Yeah, it's even some of the structures of the exhibition with the yellow floor, this temporary lover, were made with this black MDF. Yeah. Well, so the third topic is like temporary autonomous zone, which is actually a book. So why temporary autonomous zone? Like working on like display structures for like art galleries or like art fair like for example, like in the last case. So what we have understood that sometimes like we can see like the space for art as a sort of like place where like also for like temporary we can imagine like sort of like different form of reality, even just like transforming the space. You know, the idea of the white cube, it's like this empty place with any connection with the outside where you can experiment and invent almost everything. You know, so it's like your personal world in like in a small scale. And so like there is this book called like Temporary Autonomous Zone, which is like a really important book for us. And yeah, why is so important? Like it's a book from like 91, written by Hakim Bey, which is like an anonymous writer, like almost nobody knows who is him. So at the core of the book, there is like a fascination, a strong fascination for like cyberculture, for like crypto-anarchism, like rape tribes, and even like this pirates community, you know, of like the 15th centuries, like around the Mediterranean. And like why like he started to study like this, what he defined this like temporary sort of revolution, you know, because like after the 68, you know, there was this huge crisis of like the left-wing thinking. So like there was this sort of like pessimistic view, like it's not possible to realize, you know, like any revolution, you know. So we had this idea, like this utopian view. But why the book is interesting? Because actually say, well, that's not true. Because you can realize your daily sort of like revolution, right? And like let's look at like rape tribes, you know, for example. Like rape tribes are like this group of people which like goes around like, you know, like an entire country with like van and a sound system inside the van, organizing like this temporary explosion, like as a form with like just a party, you know, as a form of revolution. So he said like we should learn, you know, how to make our own temporary autonomous zone and like escape before like the mainstream culture and the control can like just caught, you know, like can catch you. You know, and so you can get caught from like the mainstream culture. So like we have tried like in the years to use like the art space as a sort of like temporary autonomous zone from our point of view, or like space for, let's say, performing. So this is one of the cases. This is like a temporary pavilion for a performing art festival, and was called Boomscape. And well, yeah, the festival, the main topic of the festival was something like colonizing the space, like space colonies, something like that. Yeah. And so like they proposed us to design like this pavilion for like some collateral events, like in performances. And so like we defined like this space through like the use of this like quite clear scenography. So you had, you know, like an inside and outside, like a strong definition. So like when you cross, you know, like this door, you're like entering like in a sort of like different space where like a sort of like different like activities of like sociality is possible, right? And so like the space was even covered like on the floor with this like translucent materials, and was actually like just like a container for like any possible activity of the festival. And there was also like this system, small system of like pillows that they were like moving and composing in different way. Yeah, like for like different audience. Yeah, well, this was, for example, like a choir. Yeah. And well, this was like a reading. Yeah.
In this case, you can see how the fakeness and the kind of scenography is shown at the end. We don't want, in this case, to hide what is technical, because at the end it's fake, this this space, and also connected to the concept of
like
theater, and what you can do through architecture and through installation, or pavilion in this case. You need to see the fakeness of the ambient that you create, and also the lightning are simply hang on the top of the wall, and all the cables go around outside the pavilion, and also nothing else.
Yeah, so like the last work, it's actually like our first permanent intervention. Is the interior design of an art gallery. So in a way, like in that case, we try to push, like, you know, like to the extreme, this concept of like the art space as a possible like temporary autonomous zone. So like the space is divided in like 3 parts, and yeah, like the first part, the one in the middle, is like the extreme of the white blue. So like this like glossy, like almost translucent space, you know, like completely white, that, yeah, like a space where you can lose like even the sense of like dimension or scale of objects or bodies. You know, like at the end of that space there is this like curtain, once again with this like translucent colorful material, which was for us like, let's say, a sort of like Stargate, you know, like yeah, like the limit between like 2 completely different realities. And so on the other side there is the opposite, you know, this like naked space. Like, so we just like yeah, like took out like all the finishes of like this second space. You know, as you can see, there is like a really defined line between like this super white space and after like this super rough naked, yeah, space with like also different kind of lighting. So here we have like this square, and on the other side we had like this like straight line, and yeah, on that space we also have this series of like elements like furnitures that we can move around to compose like different spaces. Yeah, and even like another like furnitures like on wheels. Yeah.
In this case, the clients need to do 3 different kind of space because they want to realize it in this gallery workshop, they want to invite people in residencies, but in the same time they want a place where, I don't know, you can exhibit, I don't know, in an appropriate way, in a traditional and classic way. And then we extremize completely the two concepts that he wants. Yeah. And we add a little part outside.
Yeah, like in the last part, like the third part was like this, like space. It's a sort of like, is the entering space to the gallery, which was more like a space for like public activities during the summer, like performances. So there is like this different levels space, like let me show you here. You know, like a space made like on different levels where people can sit here, or like have like a sort of stage on that part, or like, I mean, have a stage here and sit on the other part. And so there is this sort of like dune landscape, yeah, with like plants, and it's a sort of like desert, green desert. Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, if we go to our workshop, so this is a drawing coming from the City of the Sun. So like we can see the City of the Sun as like the 4th book of this presentation, right? So why the City of the Sun is important? Because like together with Utopia, it's considered like one of the most important like book of utopian literature, and was written by, yeah, it's a work by Tommaso Campanella, who was like a Dominican philosopher. He was a priest, and well, the work was written in 1612, and was written during Campanella's imprisonment. So and the book describes this sort of theocratic society, let's say, where once again it's the center, it's goods in common, held in common. And central to the story is the description of the city itself. So, but why he was jailed? He was jailed because he was conspiring against the Spanish domination of a region in the south of Italy. And so from his point of view, the book was this, fiction and society coming out from a city, because the city was, from his point of view, this sort of pedagogical, infrastructure necessary, to realize this really convivial and horizontal society, right? And so but in a way, there is the city is not made by the citizen itself, it's a planned city. So actually we don't know, from the book, we don't understand who built the city or who designed the city. It's the city was always there, and so somehow what we want to try to do, through the workshop. Of course, you cannot read the entire book, even if it's a really short book. It's in 1 day, 2 days you can read it. You can also find. Well, we share the book. It's both. And so we decided to have an extract. We just picked up a small part of the group of the book for every participant. So the idea it's in a way to break, this hierarchical shape city and to rebuild it together, starting from these clay models, and again to make a sort of collective vision. So for us it's that all together today we're going to rethink the city, and after are going to display different buildings and compose through different parts a new vision of this city of the sun. So what you are going to shape and work on doesn't have to be connected extremely to the book itself and the story. This extract is more, let's say, an inspiration, a starting point. Yeah.
You need to imagine that all the extract don't give to you architectonical dimension or vision. Speak about a lot of fields that can organize a society, like instruction, school, or the war, the relation with the war, or the relation with the gods, for example. And then this is kind of inspiration of a different, part and fields about the community. And so it's when we put all together at the end this model, we have the representation of single field inside this kind of new city, and is a form on new society, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show you, because during the last years we have been working a lot with this tiny clay architecture, because it's also a way, it's a material that you can shape with your hands. You don't even make a sketch before, it's just plastic. So it's really extemporary somehow. Well, these are some pictures from Jaime Maloney. Yeah, of these tiny clay models. And well, in that case, they are this sort of architecture from the desert. And well, they are connected to a small story, a small fictional story we are writing. And in a way, the architectures are taking shape, starting from the story and these characters. Yeah. Well, just to show you some examples. Yeah, and so they have a mix of different signs or languages coming from lots of different cultures, melted together and mixed. like in something that like it's also important for us the fact that like there isn't any sort of reference with an architecture style or whatever, you know. So like some parts are like reminds us about like modernist building, but at the same time there are like lots of like tribal signs or like even internet or like emoji style, like manga culture. Some of them are like animals, like from our point of view.
Also, in fact, if you imagine, I don't know, a future society at the end can have a style, but we imagine like, I don't know, this mixing of everything, because everything at the end lost their primal sense, like the modernism in a sort of way can lost a lot of sense after postmodernism or in that kind of architectural theory, to push that really, really forward. And what's happened in this society, or is in this ideal society to architecture, to spaces in particular.
Okay, so that's it. Well, do you have any
questions?
Yeah.
Acho que não tem que ter necessariamente a ver com o workshop em si, mas com o trabalho deles, se vocês tiverem uma questão comentada.
Well, so if you want, we can have like
A small
10 minutes, like a small break, and after we can start. Yeah? Thank you.
Really reminds me that I